of the Bay Area Forager. Mia has been foraging since she was a little girl in Finland, and she's been foraging in California for over 20 years. She has written 2 books about foraging, the Bay Area Forager and the Sierra Forager. So Mia, it's up to you. I've stopped sharing and I'm hoping you can share now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I actually cannot share, Susan. The share has not stopped.
Oh, really? Oops, you're right. I have not stopped sharing. Thank you.
There we go. Just a second here. Thank you. Susan, is it possible for people to put things in the chat on this? I notice I can't actually see the participants unusually.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yes, people should be able to add questions to the chat or to the Q&A.
Okay, wonderful. Great. Well, unusually I can't see how many of you are here, but I can see Susan, and I am presuming that there are, oh great, somebody's saying hi. That makes me feel less lonely. Hi. Welcome. I am gonna share my screen here shortly, but good evening. Actually, before we start with my screen share, I would just like to start how I always like to start on my plant walks and pretty much all my classes, which is just by being grateful, which isn't so just. It's a big, small thing, one of those small things that makes a big difference. And I am wondering first, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, because it'll make our gratitude even more interesting here, is where you are currently located. That helps me also kind of just know what might be around you. So if you can just, if you feel comfortable, just let me know, where are you right now? Okay, lots of Bay Area, probably. I'm guessing most people will be in Bay Area. All right. Oh, Anchorage. Wow. All right. Not everybody Bay Area. Oh, and Los Angeles. Okay, so kind of not all, and even Sierra Foothills. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you so much, because then really we are really focusing on most of Northern California here, which is perfect. I don't know if I know how to forage in Anchorage, but I would love to come visit and find out. If I do, might be sort of similar to my homeland of Finland. But yeah, and then if you are able to, maybe you're able to see out a window right now, or maybe you have house plants, but if you can just get your plant eyes on and look around you and just see what plant beings are around. And maybe you want to put some of those in the chat. What are some plants that you can either see inside your house or outside your house right now? Where I'm sitting over here in Truckee, California, in the Sierra Nevada mountains, which is the ancestral lands of the Washoe people, and also many other tribes who came through here. Where I'm sitting today on a nice, calm after the storm afternoon, evening. I guess it's not evening, but the storm ended in the afternoon. Thank goodness. We got huge pieces of hail today, like really big, like size of quarters, and power went out and everything. So I'm feeling really grateful for this calm, and I'm looking outside my window and I see some pine trees, of course, and I see an aspen. I see some grasses and mule's ears, and a sunflower that we've just recently planted, and a little miniature pineapple plant that's on my table. Oh, nice. Great. This is really helpful for me to get an idea of your plant communities here. And out of those plants that you are seeing outside or inside or thinking about, think about one plant, or notice one plant that has either brought you joy or beauty or contributed something to your life today? And with that presencing of gratitude for all those plants that really do contribute so much to our lives each day is how I like to start, because it really is remarkable how much generous gifts we get from plants each day. Beautiful. Oh yeah, many people with mugwort. Yeah, this is my assistant, my daughter, who really is supposed to be asleep right now, but I told her that I'm going to be teaching about plants, which is also a passion topic for her. And I said, I'm going to teach people that they cannot eat poison hemlock. And she's like, well, can I please watch? And I'm like, well, if you're really, really quiet, then you can be my assistant. So you might see her little face pop in here every now and then. But yeah, all right. Thank you for sharing all those wonderful plants and bringing those into our midst, those wise beings that really are the reason that I am here today, to hopefully further the message of the smallest or silentest voices that maybe even don't have a voice to speak sometimes, the plants that probably have so much to say, but can't always say it. So I always hope that whatever I'm saying might further their well-being, and that they might be even more abundant and healthy for the future generations. Yes, no poison hemlock, that's correct. Oh my, I have a recent poison hemlock story, but I'm going to hold off on that. All right, I am going to share my screen here. Oh great, it works. That's always a bonus. You never know if technological things are going to work, and when they do, it's a gift. So here we go. So yeah, I believe that I was asked today to talk to this Native Plant Society group about sustainable harvesting of wild edibles. I am really glad to be invited to speak to the Native Plant Society, because it really is true that there is a lot to be harvested sustainably, and that there are a lot of what we call weeds, and probably a lot of plants that the Native Plant Society is very actively trying to get rid of to make more room for native plants that we can actually eat. So it's one of those eat your, or what is it called? There's a book that is something like find your weeds and eat them too, or pull your weeds and eat them too. So this particular slideshow will be very much focused on that. We did gratitude, but this is a beautiful picture, actually by my co-author Kevin, for the Bay Area Forager, that is kind of a glorified wild food salad. I think somebody in the chat actually said nasturtium was a plant that they were feeling grateful for, noticing around them. And San Francisco certainly has a ton of nasturtium in Golden Gate Park and such, but it is a wonderful plant to put into your salad, nice and spicy. Oh, what's going on? Here we go. There we go. So my name is Mia, and I grew up foraging in Finland, actually. I am from Finland, and I moved to the US when I was about 15. And when I was a little girl, foraging was a very common activity. It still is more common in Finland, which is quite understandable, because the Finnish understory of the forest floor is basically blueberries and lingonberries and cloudberries and wild raspberries and wild strawberries. So how could you not forage when your forest floor is full of berries and mushrooms all summer long? So most families go out in the forest into their summer cabins and pick berries together, which is a really lovely way to spend time. Mushroom foraging is also really usual. So when I moved here to the US and I was interested in outdoor activities and naturalist studies, I one day just started asking the question, well, aren't things here edible too? And how come people aren't eating them? Seems like there must be something edible. And back in those days, there weren't quite as many resources available as now. If these books that I wrote weren't out, and there was the oh gosh, Ewell Gibbons books, of course, which were from the 60s when there was kind of an interest wave in foraging. And those do have a lot of information. They're great books, actually. They don't really have color photos and therefore a really broad region. So it was not easy at all to find out which things were edible. It actually took me and also Kevin a long time to be able to assemble the information that we have in this book. A lot of it through being both permaculture gardeners, because we just had an interest in what creates edible gardens. And then through just reading a lot of resources. In fact, me and Kevin often joke that some of the things we say on our wild food walks took us like 10 years to learn, and now we're saying it in 1 millisecond. But that's okay, because really, I am just so happy that more people are interested now. Susan was just telling me, she said, lots of people are interested in foraging. And that's wonderful, because it really, there's a strong connection to foraging and taking care of our plant communities. Really, if you think about it, you wouldn't want to have a really messy refrigerator or a really messy grocery store. You want to take care of the places you eat from. So if you eat from your backyard or you eat from the forest, you're more likely to notice if things aren't doing well, and actually want to change that. So eventually I ended up writing the Bay Area Forager with Kevin because we saw a need for a hyper local foraging guide where people wouldn't have to weed through, nice pun there, weed through a bunch of information that wasn't relevant to their local area, but could actually pick up a book that was for their area and particularly about the plants that they might see. And then just this year, my Sierra Forager came out, because I did live for a long time in the Bay Area, but before that I was in the Sierras, and I'm back in the Sierras now. And we really aim for these books to be very accessible to everybody, to be interesting enough for an expert forager, but to be very accessible to the beginner. So yeah, sustainable harvesting. This is my son harvesting some cattails. Foraging is super fun, and he's having a good time there. Especially harvesting cattail pollen is really fun. Cattail pollen is actually really nutritious, really good for you, high in protein. All parts of cattails are edible in different seasons, and a lot of places cattails are quite what we would call invasive. There's a lot of them, and nobody would be worried that there would be too few. In fact, a lot of places there is a concern that the cattails are becoming too abundant and taking over a lot of water habitat. So so there definitely is a place for eating the things that are in overabundance and actually helping the environment in that way. Besides that idea of taking things that are in overabundance, there is also just being able to harvest in such a way that doesn't harm a plant. For example, nettles, if you cut off in the right spot, right above where the two leaves are, it'll grow back. So you're not actually really harming the plant, you're encouraging it to grow longer until it flowers, which isn't normally a problem. So there's that too, is actually knowledgeable harvesting is another thing. And then, as I mentioned, I really do think that the relationship enhancing qualities of foraging are really aligned with us becoming better caretakers of our place. And anything that connects us with nature, apparently there's lots of studies that we need that kind of time. For some reason, my little arrow thing is not working like it does usually, but I will try. You know, Susan, I can't actually check the chat right now. My controls are not working the same way as I'm used to. So I don't know if there's something on the chat that somebody needs. I can't click on it currently.
So someone is is asking if your daughter is eating something that she might be chewing.
My daughter is eating food, yes, but not foraging currently.
Yeah, they say that they can hear her chew.
Oh no, she's not doing that kind of chewing. Are you making? I think that must be something else.
Okay, yeah, I hear sort of a clicking too, but it may not be chewing, maybe some other clicking. Hmm.
I wonder, can you still hear something?
Not right now. Oh
Okay.
yeah, Julia can hear it though. Hmm.
Okay, then it's probably something else because my daughter is being completely quiet right now. I don't know what it would be. I don't hear any noise myself. I wonder, I'm supposing everybody is muted.
Yeah, everyone else is muted.
Okay,
Except
I'm
for me, and
sorry,
I'm
I'm
going to
not
go back
sure what
on.
it would be. I mean, that was my daughter making a sound just there, but otherwise it was pretty quiet over here. I wonder if there's some kind of a strange internet thing.
Yeah, Justine's saying it sounds like someone else's microphone, but I mean, other than you and me, there's no one else who's able to be heard. It's just that's the way the webinar works.
That is
I'm,
so strange. Is there
I
anything
apologize
that
to
I
everyone.
should do? I'm not hearing anything on my side that's noisy right now. Would you like me to? I'm not sure what I could do. Is it really disturbing for people? Can they hear it right now still? Should I continue, Susan, or what do you think?
If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and continue, because I'm just not sure what else we could do.
I mean, I suppose it would be pretty disruptive, but I could try to, like, in case it's a connection issue, I could sign off and sign
Please
back
don't, because
in.
you're a co-host, and if you sign off, it
Right.
ends the recording.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I really don't know. I don't have anything I can hear myself. So I'm guessing it must be in like a tech related clicking or something, which I don't know. I'm not sure what to do about it, but definitely please let me know if there's any suggestions, and I cannot currently click on the chat. So Susan, I appreciate if you can, or whoever is able to tell me if there's something important in the chat.
Okay, I'll monitor that, and I'm going to go back on mute.
Okay, thank you. All right. Let's see here. Okay, so then since we're talking about harvesting, it is a really important thing, of course, to know about hazards. And this is probably a hazard that is familiar to many of you. It is very common all over California, poison oak. And funny enough, poison oak is neither poisonous or an oak. Poisonous means that you cannot eat it. And oak would be an oak tree, and it is neither. And poison oak is actually related to a lot of edible things. It is in the cashew family, and there is the lemonade berry, the sumac, that is widely used as a spice in the Mediterranean and also grows more north of us in Mendocino County and such. There's actually some also in different places of the Bay Area, but it's more rare. It looks pretty much exactly like poison oak, but it has delicious edible sour berries. So you can actually eat poison oak, not that you would want to. Most people would have a severe allergic reaction to it, so I can't recommend it, but you could. And I have actually seen somebody eat poison oak, just pop a little sprig of it in their mouth. I can't recommend it, but they had done that many times and believed that that was a way that kept poison oak at bay. So definitely watch out for that when you're foraging. Most people cannot eat it. Then this plant is very important to know about, poison hemlock. It is very widespread and it is very, very poisonous. So this is the plant that was given to Socrates as a tea, and he was made to drink it so that he would die. And a very small amount will kill someone. So we like to say that that red, as you can see in this picture, there's little red blotches. Some people call them Socrates blood, so that you can remember and be spooked that this is poison hemlock and you should definitely not harvest it. In fact, I would recommend staying away from all carrot family plants until you are more experienced at plant identification. Now, some of you may be botanists, since this is a Native Plant Society talk, and you might be very good at keying out Apiaceae family plants. And if so, then you might be able to identify wild carrot or sweet cicely and eat those safely. But if you're not sure, I would not harvest any carrot family plants, because also our most poisonous plant in North America, the water hemlock, is in that same family. And here is a picture of that. Water hemlock is even more poisonous than poison hemlock. And some people will confuse water hemlock when it is young with watercress when it's really young. So that's how people have gotten poisoned. It's pretty obvious when it's big, but when it's small, it's of course harder. So these are some plants to be very aware of before you start foraging. And then, of course, the death camas lily. A lot of camas lilies are delicious and edible, but the death camas is deadly. So it's very important to know your lily family plants well if you're going to be harvesting camas bulbs. But you wouldn't be harvesting camas bulbs anyway if you are concerned about native plants, because they are a precious native plant that is starting to be rarer in many places, even though in the past they would have covered entire meadows. So that's another reason not to be harvesting camas, but it's another very important plant to know. Those are some of the most common poisonous or hazardous plants in California to know about as you go hiking or foraging. And I would recommend that anybody intending to go foraging learn those very first. Then for some edible plants. And as I said earlier, I'm going to be focusing very much on edible plants that are in abundance and are usually non-native, and everybody would love for you to harvest them most of the time. So thistles are a great example of that. Most people would be happy if you came into their yard or farm or whatever area or wild area and harvested their thistles. Thistles range a lot in size and appearance. We have teeny tiny little yellow flowered, very bitter thistles. And then we have the, gosh, why am I forgetting the name? Oh yeah, cardoons. We have the cardoons like in the East Bay Hills that are quite huge. And maybe many of you know what edible plant the thistle is related to. If I could see the chat, I would ask you, does anybody know what the thistle is related to that we eat commonly? And you can think. They are related to artichokes, and they taste just like artichokes. An artichoke is a giant thistle flower. So normally on wild thistles, you're not going to be eating the flower. That would be very cumbersome. But instead, you can eat the fresh spring stalks, because the stalks and the leaves, because the thistle spikes are actually very easy to remove. You can even see in this picture that they mostly are around the edges of the leaves, and the stalks don't actually have any. So if you take a knife and you just peel the stalk, then you have a very nice vegetable that's kind of like a fresh little asparagus. And if you take scissors, for example, you can actually cut around the thistle leaf and eat the rest of the leaf that's not spiky. And many thistles have a delicious artichoke-like, very soft and nice flavor, especially when they first come up in spring. Once they flower strongly, they're going to be more bitter. But basically, all thistles are edible. It's just a flavor kind of thing, like some of the yellow flowered ones, for example, which are more like the wild lettuces, are very bitter. And so I often just actually taste the thistle and see if I like it. And another nice thing about thistles is there's not really many poisonous lookalikes. In fact, I can't think of one. And that kind of brings up a question. People often ask me, well, is there a poisonous lookalike? And for that one, it is a little bit of an objective question, because depending on how well versed you are in plant identification, somebody might think something looks like something else that I don't think that looks like something else. But I will tell you when there are things that are obvious poisonous lookalikes. All right, and then pretty much everybody knows the dandelion. It's kind of a poster child of edible plants. We don't have many in the dry areas of California, but certainly up here in the Sierras, we have dandelions all over the place, and they're quite tasty. Dandelions are edible in many different ways. The leaves are used as greens. Even grocery stores sell them these days, and they're very good for you. They're very healthy for your liver cleansing, liver tonifying. And the roots can be used as a coffee substitute. In fact, my grandparents during the war in Finland, when there was no coffee that they could have, would roast the dandelion roots and make them into a coffee-like drink. And I think many health food stores still carry something called Dandy Blend. And again, it's much better for you than coffee, though it does taste somewhat different, but it's a fun thing to try. My favorite part to eat of the dandelion is actually the yellow flower. Those to me taste a lot less bitter, milder than the leaves. And I like to just eat them fresh, or you can make dandelion flower wine, or you can actually fritter them, which is kind of a fun thing to do with them. Make like little tempura dandelions, which have a nice shape, and they are very tasty. Here's another very common, what many people call weed plant. Lots of people like to remove these from their gardens, and it's difficult because they have very, very long roots, sometimes difficult to pull out of dry ground. But this is dock, and there are many different types of dock. Curly dock, yellow dock, there's many types. And for edible purposes, it doesn't actually really matter if you know how to identify the type of dock. You just need to identify that it is dock with its long oblong leaves. And often these seed stalks, in fact, my favorite part to eat of dock is the seeds. Once they get brown, these are still green in this picture, but once they dry up and get brown, you can very easily shake them off and use them to put in any baked savory things such as breads or crackers, possibly even pancakes, but they are kind of savory, almost with a taste a little bit like rye, like they have, or I want to say caraway, but not really. They do have their own taste, so they're not exactly for sweet things, but they're quite tasty. Leaves are also edible. Some people like to use the young stalks like rhubarb, so cook them up and use them similarly to rhubarb. And the roots are actually useful for natural dye, not really an edible thing, but they do make a very nice dye. I'm wondering if anybody has had questions on the chat so far about these plants that I'm covering here. I don't want to miss anything. I see there's lots of comments on the chat. So are there any that I should address at this point before moving on?
Not that I can see, but thank you for stopping and checking.
Okay, thanks. All righty. And then Douglas fir is something that also grows a lot in our disturbed forests and grows very fast and abundantly, and often takes over big areas of forest where it's being actively removed for fire purposes and for habitat purposes, and so, or for biodiversity purposes. The tips of Douglas fir are really delicious. They should be pretty much in season right now. They're just getting kind of out of season in the Bay Area, but it's not too late to get them. They're just, I actually like to bite them off the Douglas fir like a deer. Like you can actually just eat them right off the tree. Or you could put them in a salad. You could put them in a drink. They even the older needles flavor a drink really nicely. The older needles, it's kind of like the thistle where you kind of want to taste whether you like the taste or not. They really vary in taste. It's not the species that is the species matters too, but it's often what kind of soil it's growing in, shade, sun kind of conditions. Like, what does that particular fir taste like? And do you think it's too bitter or do you like it? Real firs are also edible, but maybe not as in the category of things that people want to remove. But they are equally edible, as are pines as well. So pine needles, and actually the whole tree is edible, but since we have a hard time digesting bark and wood, it's not the normal thing that we would eat. Mustards, there's tons of different mustards, and being in the Brassica family, which is the same family as broccoli and cauliflower, these are plants that can be readily eaten. Often the flowers are quite spicy. And here you can see there's the yellow variety and the purple variety, which sometimes is called wild radish as well. But all these mustards, radishes, there's very many different types. The way to identify them is that cruciferous flower that has the 4 petals crisscross from each other, usually small flowers. And the leaves really vary quite a lot. Many of them have little seed pods that are really tasty, that are spicy. And when they're newer seed pods, they're one of my favorite things to eat on the mustard. You could also use the leaves as a cooking green, quite delicious in omelets and such, especially the younger leaves are. But the flowers are really fun in a salad or just to decorate any kind of food that you are making. And they're so abundant. I mean, there's big fields of wild mustard all over the place. Now, I should say here, many of these plants do have native species. The pictures that I've been showing are all the non-native species, but there are native mustards. They're just much more rare. So as you're foraging, same thing with thistles, there are native thistles. So you would need to know which one is the non-native species and which one is the species that you probably don't want to harvest. But the good news is, or the bad news in a different way, is that most of the mustards, anything that looks like this with larger flowers and such, is not the native species. And same with the thistles. The native thistles are not those ones with the really big purple flowers most of the time, and they're not as common. But to be sure, it's nice to look up the native ones before you go harvesting. Nettle, I think I already mentioned nettle a little bit earlier. Some species of nettle are native and some are not. Some are from Europe. But nettle is very abundant, currently very, very abundant here in the Sierras. Might be getting slightly past its season in the Bay Area, but around the coast, it's a good thing to harvest. Probably still for another couple weeks. It's nicest to get it before it flowers. Once it flowers, like many other things, it's bitter. So again, as I mentioned before, this one, nettle, you can really harvest it sustainably by just cutting it right above where the 2 leaves oppose each other, right above that nodule. You just cut it a little bit above it and it will regrow its top. So that's how you can harvest nettle tops with scissors quite easily. And of course, these sting, so you need to be careful about that, but the sting is not dangerous. In fact, many people sting themselves on purpose. There is like nettle acupuncture therapy where people believe that it's quite good for arthritis, for example. So yes, it hurts, but it's a temporary sting and it's not dangerous for you. They are really little mechanical stingers that inject something very similar to formic acid, which is the acid that ants have, into your skin, and that's what irritates it. But they're very worth it because nettles are probably my favorite edible plant. I'm just about to go harvest lots of nettles this weekend. I harvest them every year in abundance and I freeze them. They are so good for you. They're so high in minerals. They are a great plant for preventing seasonal allergies and allergies of any sort. They're really a superfood, and you can use them in so many different ways. You can cook with them like spinach, you can make soups, you can make lasagna, you can make pesto, you can grind them up fresh and make a nettle smoothie, you can make nettle tortillas. There's what can't you do with nettle? You could add them pretty much into anything, and it is just so high in vitamins and minerals, which a lot of wild foods are. The studies indicate that the wild foods just have a higher level of nutrition than the foods that we grow on farms, possibly because they're living in more whole, healthier ecosystems still, for the most part.
And then we've got a question about nettles. Does freezing them deactivate the sting or only heat?
Oh, great question. Thank you. In fact, I kind of remembered and forgot that I didn't quite say that clearly enough. So the stingers are mechanical. They only work when they're whole. If you break it, it's like a mini syringe. If you break it in any way, it can't work. So you can put it in a blender, you can just crush it really hard with a spoon. Sometimes I harvest nettles with my bare hands and I just crush it a lot with my fingertips that are a little hardened and not likely to get stung very much. So you just need to break it. And I usually I actually often make them into ice cubes. Like I blend them in my blender and then freeze them as ice cubes so that they'll be really easy to just pop into whatever dish I'm making. Also drying them, it depends. Some of the coastal nettles, for example, have some pretty serious stingers. So they might not even disappear when you dry them, but most of the more, well, normal or the less, maybe the ones on the coast have to survive more things and they get hardier. I don't know, but most of them, even when they just dry up, the stingers won't be as potent. And then another common plant here that we have all over the place, plantain, that you will often see on kind of trail sides and roadsides. Plantain is a very medicinal plant. It is amazing for drawing out infection. It is one of those plants that if I had to travel, well, actually what it is if I had to come to a strange land all the way from Europe and I'd never been there, I might just bring some plantain seeds with me. And possibly that is exactly what happened, because plantain is such an effective infection fighter that I would imagine that people used to having that medicine would want it with them. It is also very good for internally for ulcers. It really coats, it's mucilaginous. In fact, the plantain seeds are the same as psyllium husks. Psyllium comes from a species of plantain, not one that we have, but the seeds of it do that same fibrous and stomach soothing function that psyllium seeds do. The flavor of plantain leaves is a little bit, not exactly bitter, but a little bit intense in a way. So it's not my favorite. Some people do put it in smoothies and such because it is so good for you, but it's a little bit bitterish, strong. So my favorite part of the plantain to harvest is once these bobblehead flowers go to seed, you can actually just rub them with a finger and the seeds will fall out. And those are really tasty. They taste soft and nutty, and you could technically sprinkle those on a salad if you were really harvesting carefully and committed to harvesting a lot, or you can just eat them. Here in the Sierras, we have a lot of salsify that is very difficult to control it because of those wonderful dandelion-like puffball flowers that salsify produces, or the seed heads that salsify produces. It spreads very readily, and it has spread here a lot.
Can I ask a quick question?
But it is edible.
Can I ask a quick Plantago question on the plantains? There are a couple of important ones, the subnuda and the erecta, that are associated with one of our federally endangered butterflies. And I was wondering, as a larval plant, and I was wondering if those are equally edible. Yeah, the bay checker spot only uses the Plantago erecta as its larval plant.
Yeah, so that's a great example of what I was saying before, where there are some native species and they are edible, but they do look different from the Plantago major and the Plantago lanceolata. So I think they look different enough and they're rare enough that it would be unusual to make that mistake. And also, most likely you would be finding them in a different place. These plantains that we are looking for tend to grow in either waste places, the sides of trails, or kind of more disturbed areas. I actually have a very hard time finding the native plantains. I have tried, and maybe somebody has a lot of them, but it's more rare to come across those.
One of the things I like to do to ask people when to consider planting native plants is if something is edible to consider doing that. And so if Plantago erecta and subnuda do have edible parts, that would be helpful to know, so that I could say, oh, it's edible for the butterfly and for you. Here, go get this.
Okay. Well, as far as I know, all the plantain family members are edible.
Okay.
Yeah, and all the parts of it are edible.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you so much.
All right.
And I'll let you get back to salsify. Thank you.
Yeah. So salsify was actually used widely as a vegetable in the Middle Ages. I think one reason it's gone out of popularity is because its root is it wilts pretty quickly. So even when you grow it in the garden, which I've done, it just wilts quickly. And so maybe just the kind of, it doesn't travel well. In fact, there's quite a few edible plants that are tasty and great, but they just don't travel well. So salsify is one of those. There are purple flowered ones as well, which are a more common kind of garden weed, and then these yellow flowered ones. As far as I have tasted, the purple flowered ones do taste better. These yellow ones tend to be more bitter, but maybe that's just where they grow. Because like this one, as you can see in the picture, it's growing in a pretty dry area and probably not getting a lot of water. So I did eat this particular root in the picture and it wasn't very tasty. It was quite strong. You can eat all the parts. So the leaves are very tough. So usually I eat the stalk when it's young. And the flower is edible, but the best part is really the root. Wild plums are just ripening right now. This is a great time to go and get the wild plums. I was in the Bay Area last weekend and they were just almost ready, but not quite. And it looks like the plum trees have more plums than ever before with a really wet winter. So definitely go and harvest your wild plums, and they are little plums. So not much mystery about that. Usually best way to eat them is just to eat them fresh. Some people do harvest them and make things out of them. The only thing is that they're more cherry size. So there is a seed inside and it can be a little cumbersome to get rid of the seed. One way to deal with that is to cook them up and then strain them so that the seed comes out, and then make that into a juice. You could also blend them gently and same thing, strain out the large seeds and then use that pulp to make popsicles or fruit leather or something like that, which I have done. And this would be a good year to do all those projects. There are yellow ones and then there are reddish purple ones as well.
Another question from the Q&A. Carol's asking if we can eat hedge nettle, which is the Stachys family.
Oh, great question. And that is actually my most commonly asked question in the Bay Area. It's so funny. I don't know what it is about that plant that everybody on the walks is always like, and what's this plant? Can we eat it? Maybe it's because it looks like a mint. It looks like a nettle. So it reminds us of plants that we can eat. Oh, actually, as I'm saying this, I'm just remembering that lemon balm is really invasive in the East Bay and it's a great thing to eat, but I don't have a picture of it. But just as a side note, if you're somewhere where there's lots of lemon balm that's escaped, go ahead and eat it. It's great stress relieving tea. Hedge nettle is, so there are poisonous plants, there's edible plants, then there's plants that just aren't palatable, but they're not poisonous. And hedge nettle is somewhere in there. Oh, and then there's kind of like medicinal plants. There's somewhere in between zones. Hedge nettle, I don't know if you've ever smelled it, but some people think the smell is interesting and kind of good, and others just think it's really not a good smell. So you can make it into a tea, but the flavor and the smell is not liked by most. It has been used as a cold remedy, but yeah, it doesn't. It has an interesting kind of pungent smell, almost like urine sometimes. So it's not the most palatable. So this plant, I'm sure everybody knows, blackberries, and that is definitely something that is in abundance, and a lot of people need to get out of their gardens and lands and such. So, and many people harvest blackberries because they're so delicious. One thing that not many people know is that the leaves are also edible. The young leaves are actually very good for you, especially for female systems, because things in the rubus family are tonifying for the female systems. So, and they're tasty. I like to make blackberry leaf pesto, especially. I find that the blackberry leaf adds a nice little flavor into my pesto. And for that, you just use the really young leaves that are not yet spiky. They're more hairy, and they're not severely hairy like the older leaves. So just a little interesting thing about blackberries. And then this one is a kid favorite, the sour grass, the oxalis, which is, again, this is another, oh, and there are native blackberries too. So a lot of these, there is a native version, but it is way less common, and it is usually smaller, I have noticed. Like most of these bigger versions are not the ones that are native. So here too, there is a redwood sorrel that is the same. Yeah, this is one of your favorite plants. That's true. This is a kid favorite. The redwood sorrel is much smaller, and it's pink with a pink flower that's much smaller. And this one is, a lot of people think it's clover. Clover is also edible, but if you look closely, these leaves are a lot more defined in little heart shapes than a clover leaf would be. Now, oxalis, the name comes from that these have oxalic acid in them, which is what makes for that sour, nice, tangy taste. But it's also not great for us to eat too much oxalic acid. Now, we're talking about like daily amounts of oxalic acid, which is also present in rhubarb and spinach. So really, will you get too much oxalic acid if you eat oxalis? Probably not, unless you're eating it in large amounts every day. So this is a very safe and tasty plant to eat that is found in abundance. And another very common thing to find in your garden, even if you didn't plant it, and one of my favorite greens, often also sold, and I haven't seen it lately at a market, but farmers market sells purslane. It's really a nice tasting green. It's actually got a little bit of that similar tanginess and almost like a succulent-like texture to it that makes a really nice, crisp and fresh in a salad. And it's easy to identify because when you touch those leaves, maybe you can see it in the picture, they are a little succulent, like they're thick to the touch, a little bit leathery. And these just tend to grow amongst like farm row crops or in your garden as a weed. Places like that. I don't usually see them in the wildlands, the purslane, but it is definitely a worthwhile one to pick. And then for our last plant visitor of the day, though this does not mean there are not more, there are many, many edible weeds still that I did not put here. And maybe since this is almost the last one, I will say that I myself am not really actually that fond of the word weed. I don't like to pull any kind of plants out in disrespect. I do think that every plant has a place to be here. That doesn't mean that I don't also think that there's a time to pull a bunch of broom out. But I do, encourage you to harvest even these things that many call weeds with respect and in a good way. And that I think is a really important thing. We want to respect all the plants, even if we are going to pull them out because they are taking space from something that we think would be better there. Anyhow, mallow, there are many plants in the family mallow, and they are all edible as far as I know. This one is common mallow. There are many native mallows as well. This one is quite big and grows in waste places. These leaves are about a little bit less than baseball size. You've probably seen them even in a parking lot. Many people know that marshmallows are really from mallows. It used to be that the little seed pods of the marshmallow were used to make candies because they are an emulsifier, they're a thickener. So you can still use mallow seed pods in that same way in a soup or in anything that you want thickened. The leaves have some of that same function, and those can also be used as greens. They have a little bit of a funky texture. It's almost a little bit hairy, so they're not really that fun to eat fresh. It's nicer to cook them. The flowers are also edible. And one thing to watch out for with mallow is that it is a dynamic accumulator, so it pulls out all kinds of toxins and minerals, especially nitrogen from the soil. And so if you find it in a really dirty place, much like cattail actually, which I covered earlier on, it might be really pulling in a lot of toxins. So you may not want to eat it from the parking lot regularly. Could you eat it sometime? Yes, but maybe not regularly. Here's a nice field of mustard and wild radish and our path forward here. So this kind of slideshow is a great invitation to look up if anybody is doing an in-person foraging walk in your area, because you will definitely learn even more when you're out there with the plants yourself. You are welcome to ask me any questions now or to email me with questions. My website is just my first and last name.com, and you can easily find me through that. There are multiple classes in all through California these days about foraging. It's just there's not one spot to find them. So I can't unfortunately say, oh, well, just look here and you'll find your local class. So just keep your ear out for them. They are definitely worthwhile. There's a lot of suburban foraging to be done too. Both of my books, which are these, are available from my publisher Heyday, who's based in Berkeley, and you can just go onto their website and order them that way. I personally also do walks in the Sierras and in the Bay Area pretty frequently, and if you're interested about those, you can join my mailing list on my website, and I will keep you updated. I also very much like, especially for Bay Area, I almost more happily do custom walks because that's easier for me to just know, okay, somebody asked me to do a walk in April, I'll drive down for that. It's easier for me than trying to organize a walk from here in the Sierras. So with that, I would love to open it up for any questions. Maybe if I stop my share, I can actually see the questions. So I'm not, I don't even know if I can click on stopping the share. Let's see.
Wait, you want a picture?
Oh gosh. Let's see, this is so strange. My mouse is not, I don't know if I'm guessing, Susan, you can't stop the share, but for some reason it's disabled my mouse, so I can't actually stop the share.
Oh dear. Let me see if I can do that. Okay, that worked.
Okay, not on my side yet. Maybe if I click. Oh, yeah, okay, great. Awesome. Okay, that worked. Thank you so much. Strange.
Sure. Are you able to see the chat?
Let's see. Yes. Now
Great.
I can see it. I don't see any questions currently, but does anybody have a question?
So you talked about responsible foraging. Could you tell us what contributes to responsible foraging?
Well, first of all, a responsible attitude is what contributes to it. But the steps that I tend to use as kind of rules of thumb of how much to forage and how to forage is one of the first things that I do when I approach a plant is that I stop and first I just make sure, is this really the plant that I think it is? Another wild food person that I went on a walk with just recently said a great thing, which was, if you don't know the plant as well as you know an apple, then you probably shouldn't eat it. Because if somebody gives you a tomato and is like, here's an apple, you're going to be like, that's not an apple. So I used to say 150% sure you need to know what it is, but I actually think that that's a better kind of more, you think of it better that way, is like, do you know this plant as well as you would something that you buy at the grocery store? And then you can eat it. So that's first step. And then I personally take a second step where I actually ask for permission. And that to me is a reminder of that I'm about to harvest something that is alive. And is it really, do I have a reason? Can I actually ask it, can I please harvest your leaf because I'm going to make some soup? And if it feels like, actually, let's look around here, there's not many of these plants right here, then I don't do it. I take that pause, I take that breath. And then as a rule of thumb, I would never harvest more than a third of anything, nor would I harvest anything that is a sole plant, unless I was really trying to get rid of a whole field of thistles and therefore wanted all of them gone. I mean, there is that too, especially for today's talk where I've really focused on plants that are in overabundance. But even harvesting a third of something is a lot. So my own style is that I usually just harvest a very small amount.
How do you select the areas to forage safely?
Areas to forage safely?
Yeah, sort of away from roads and parking lots.
Okay, yeah. Well, certainly in any urban areas or any areas with humans, you want to be looking for things like telephone poles or things that might have been treated with pesticides, sports fields, golf courses, any of those might have pesticides. Though it's funny, I mean, a lot of us eat things sprayed with all sorts of things that are growing along Highway 5. So, but it's still maybe not preferable to eat from those zones. And then of course there is dog poop or pee and such kind of more natural pollutants, which are easy to wash away. If you're worried about something being dirty, just wash it with apple cider vinegar or a little bit of hydrogen peroxide.
That sounds great.
Oh, great question. I see. Do you need permission to harvest in open space? Yes. So most public lands do not allow you to harvest anything. There are some exceptions, like some national forests and some BLM lands and such do allow you to harvest a certain amount for personal consumption. But most like state parks and open space reserves, especially in urban areas like the Bay Area or LA, the law is that you're not allowed to harvest anything and you're not actually even allowed to touch any sticks or anything. So that is good to know.
Oh, even weeds, because yeah, I weed everywhere.
Yeah, and so this is a really interesting, that is a very interesting point. And I have known recently some people who have gotten permission to harvest something invasive, but it's hard because even some of those restoration projects have very specific, because I volunteered at state parks pulling like what is it? Why am I not remembering? Forget-me-nots and things like that. And even those have been very, very specific as to where to pull and how much to pull.
Wow. Okay. That's good to know. How have you seen the rainfall changing plants that you're considering foraging?
Well, this year's rainfall is making for much more abundance, especially in the past few drought years. That's a pretty common pattern, and it's nice to see some things popping up that are more rare to see. I've seen a lot more Mariposa lilies, for example, just recently in the Bay Area than there were last year. Somebody says, are brooms edible? Some people say they are. Some people say they're medicinal. You can make brooms out of some brooms. Broom making is actually a wonderful art. Like Scotch broom makes a nice broom. It's a little bit questionable. I've heard different things. I haven't personally eaten broom.
Do you have any recommended recipes? I appreciate what you've been talking us through so far. And I appreciate the fact I do love the Bay Area Forager. I've got all kinds of post-its in mine, and I appreciate the fact that you've got recipes in this. Are there any other recipes that you'd recommend?
Well, so yeah, both of my books have a lot of recipes, so that would be easy to see in both of my books. And they're often replaceable, like with a different wild edible, and I'll often suggest that replacement as well. Otherwise, some recipes that I use frequently for wild edibles, I've mentioned pesto already several times. Like certain things are easy, like pesto and smoothies. Those are like everything kind of goes, or a green soup. There was one that I just thought of actually. Oh, tortillas are kind of fun. You can put pretty much anything in a tortilla. Those are just some of the ones, or pancakes. Those are some of the ones that are really easy to use with a lot of different things. Oh, wild oats. Somebody asked about wild oats. Yes, I have used the wild oats, and it's just not one I included today, but I'm not really in a recipe, but I do eat the wild oats frequently and just kind of chew on them. And toyon berries are edible. They're not very tasty. They're edible when cooked. Toyon berries have cyanide in the seeds, just like a lot of cherry family and such do. But if you cook them, they are edible. But I haven't made anything that I like with toyon berries that I have tried, but they're very dry, and they're not that tasty in the end. As a biologist, taking invasives. Yeah, I know I think there's really a partnership that could happen there, Nicole, in terms of, I don't know if there could be some kind of a certification that somebody could take that they actually know how to identify these plants. And then that could be a partnership. I think it needs some thought, and I would be very happy to work on a project like that. And yes, toyon berries are native berries, and I don't usually harvest them. And this is a frequently asked question that Sarag, I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right, is asking here, is what about wildlife? Just a small second. Yeah, so the wildlife question, it's a difficult one, and it is true that I would err on the side of caution. If you don't have a good sense of what the wildlife eats and doesn't eat in your area, it's probably better just not to harvest the native things. Over time and having more naturalist knowledge, you might notice the things that are just being left and not eaten. For example, some types of acorns do not, like there's way of an overabundance. The animals do not eat them some years in the masting years. Same with some manzanita berries, like they just don't get eaten. But if you don't know that, it's certainly better to just err on the side of caution.
I do want to go back to Nicole's comment about removing invasives from state parks. If those of you who are on the Zoom call are interested, CNPS does have permission from San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department to remove invasives. And so when you look on our habitat restoration events, you will be with a CNPS person who has been trained by our Parks Department in terms of being able to identify invasive plants. And so that is a way for you to become trained to identify invasive plants. And a lot of us also know which of those invasive plants are tasty, the fennel, the blackberries, the the nasturtiums, and we can point you to those. And Bob knows his invasive plantago from his native plantago, so can help you with that on Sunset Boulevard. So that's one way for those of you who are interested in becoming trained. And many of you are CNPS Yerba Buena members, and are already trained and certified by Rec and Park to do that. We, especially during COVID, Rec and Park just said, yeah, CNPS, you know what we're doing, go out there and remove invasives.
Well, that's great to know. I'm glad that that is happening. And it's true, I haven't worked post-COVID in removing invasives in the Bay Area. I know pre-COVID it was a little bit challenging, at least in Marin, but I'm really glad to hear that it's becoming a little bit easier for people to participate. And fennel is a plant that could have been in this slideshow too. There's many. And actually, really, the Bay Area Forager, we mostly selected plants. Well, we didn't select any plants that were in any way under risk of being over harvested, but we mostly selected this type of plants that we've been talking about today on purpose.
I know that when I wanted to plant edible native plants in my garden, I was having trouble discovering what the secret word was to determine whether or not something was edible. And it turns out it's ethnobotany. So ethnobotany plus the local tribe name helps you determine which of those plants and which plant parts are edible.
Yeah, certainly a lot of thanks to all of those who have lived in the forests and the wildlands and accumulated this knowledge over a long period of time, which has now gotten lost to a large degree. And that's why I'm so happy to help put it together, and hopefully have each one of us contribute just a little bit so that we could restore the wealth of knowledge and connection that used to be here.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of great reasons to put native plants in our gardens, certainly to do it for wildlife, but also to feed our families and ourselves. And so and our communities. And so I hope you'll all join me in encouraging your local parks department and certainly the state parks to remove invasive plants and put in native plants, including the local native edible plants. What are the differences that you found between foraging between the Bay Area and the Sierras?
They're totally different zones. I live at high altitude here, so it's just a whole different plant community. There are some similarities as well, but really it's just different plant communities, different forest types. There's not that many pine forests in the Bay Area. In fact, very few. And just the fact that it snows so much of the year here makes a big difference. And the Sierras are an interesting climate because it's very dry, but also very wet at the same time in some places. So it's kind of an interesting one. The Bay Area is actually a really great place to forage. It's very easy, especially in the suburban zones. There's something to be foraged all year round. In the Sierras, there's definitely seasons. In the winter, all I can really forage for is pine or fir needles that stick up out of the snow and the occasional dock stem that has survived the early winter.
Wow.
But we do have Reno just close by, which is something I'm learning about more all the time right now. So if I do write a next book, it'll probably be about Reno, about Nevada areas, because there's a whole different plant community there that I'm not as familiar with, but a different climate.
Oh, great. Do they have delicious natives and delicious weeds?
Yeah, I'm just discovering it's a whole new set of plant communities. I have some familiarities there, but there's some familiar plant friends, but a lot of new things too for me.
Are there any special wonderful onions in the Sierras? I just love the different native onions.
You know, people keep asking me that, and I haven't found a whole lot of onions. And it somehow people ask me, well, do you know of any of the onion places to harvest onions? I must not be in the area of the Sierras that have like somewhere here there must be a lot of wild onions, but I have not come across a big wild onion harvest. So in the Bay Area, I have those wild onions that come out in the spring are very abundant. But yeah, here in Truckee, Tahoe area, I hear of them, but I have yet to discover abundant areas of onions.
Yeah, we have both native onions here and we have invasive onions.
Yeah, the white invasive. Yeah, and that one's great. That one's great to cook with.
It is. It is a delicious onion.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's plenty of it.
There's tons, yeah.
So what fun activities do you do to involve your children with foraging and teach them?
Well, my children just come along with me and they seem to love it, especially this one. She's like a little squirrel and she seems to kind of just innately gravitate towards edible plants almost too much sometimes.
Meow.
And my son loves it too. It is just fun. But there's certain plants that are more kid friendly, like the oxalis or the cattail with all its pollen, or the pine pollen that's so abundant, or the mints that just smell so good. Even just smelling them and not even harvesting them is great. Or the sagebrush and things that smell, I often like telling kids about. And then of course things like the plums or the blackberries that are really rewarding are great with kids as well. But I find with my kids groups that kids take to foraging really easily and they love it. And if they get to actually participate in the harvesting of the plant, they're so much more likely to eat their greens and their healthy food than they ever would if it was just the parent making it.
That makes sense.
Oh, I see a great question here about fruit left unharvested all the time in the neighborhood and being uncomfortable and knocking on total strangers' doors. Yeah, there's so much. Like right now, there's the loquats. Actually, loquats should be in season. They're so good. They're kind of a feral fruit. And they're so tasty, and a lot of people don't even know they're edible, and neighbors and places have them. It's kind of nice to get a big fruit picker and be able to actually pick things that are too high up. I think if it's overhanging a fence or in the divider, it's pretty much fair game. But I mean, I would really encourage you to just leave a note in the neighbor's mailbox. That's a non-invasive way to do it, and just say, hey, do you need help harvesting your lemons? I would love to. Marin used to have a network. It was like a gleaning network that notified people when somebody had a fruit tree that they didn't want to harvest, and that was great. But I haven't seen those emails in a long time. Somebody should. There must be one in the East Bay, because East Bay is so good at that kind of thing. But if it's not there, it's a good one to start. And yeah, just note in the mailbox, I think, is a good way.
I don't have a front yard because I live in the city. I have a sidewalk, but I do have a fruit tree, and at least I planted a fruit tree with the intention of having neighbors and visitors be able to walk by and harvest fruit. So there is that thought that if someone put it right at the edge of their property where fruit is clearly available, there was an intention to share it.
Anyone have any other questions?
How long did it take you to write that book on foraging?
My recent one, the Sierra Forager.
And the previous one, yeah, both of them.
So I loved writing the Bay Area Forager because I'm a very collaborative person. I love working as a team, and it was just so fun to write it with Kevin. Kevin and I were working for the same naturalist organization. We would just always talk about plants, and then we would do some plant walks, and it was just on the tip of our tongues, and doing it together as a Google collaborative document actually worked so well and was so much fun. And then the Sierra Forager, I decided to do something with the extra COVID time. And I thought, great, well, this is a great time to write the book. And I must say it wasn't at all as fun without Kevin. I'd much rather write another collaborative book. Plus, it's really hard to get the photos of all the plants in the right seasons by yourself in any kind of a quick time frame. That is really challenging, because if you miss it, you have to wait a whole year. Like if you forgot one or it didn't turn out, you have to wait a whole year for it to be in that same stage. So that's challenging. But both were quite quick for me to write because it's information that I'm using all the time. And it's not a creative book. It's a factual book. It's easy to just kind of talk about each plant. It has a clear format. So I think it's easier to write than a novel.
Yeah, I love this book so much.
I'm really glad to hear that. We have gotten a lot of positive feedback, and every time that a wonderful person who is already a naturalist or involved with great things such as you are, Susan, says that they like our book, it just is just wonderful. I'm so glad.
I got this book ages ago, back when I had just moved to the Bay Area and didn't know any of the plants. So it really helped bring me along from, wow, everything looks like undifferentiated green, to specific plants. And I was able to take a tour with Kevin, so that was very helpful.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, Kevin and I, neither of us live in the Bay Area anymore, unfortunately. Kevin's all the way in Tennessee, so so he doesn't do as many walks in the Bay Area anymore, but I'm glad you did.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
And both of us do Instagram channels. Actually, Kevin's these days is more related to, he's really gone into edible gardening of unusual edibles. And mine are often just kind of seasonal, low-tech posts on Instagram about whatever edible plant I have found. So that's one way also to just get some. There's a lot of good foraging Instagram channels, actually social media channels with a lot of good information. Many of them done much better than my channel, which is pretty home style because I'm not really a social media buff.
All right, are there any other questions? All right, well, oh my gosh, Mia, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your approach with all of us. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope that it was helpful and inspiring to many of you, and please reach out with questions through my website if you would like, and I hope to see you at a wild food walk soon.
All right, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.